much for inviting me here today. I'm going to speak in English. I have a habit of talking very fast. So if I'm going too fast, just give me some warning signs and I'll try and slow down. So yes, as you explained, I help a lot of organizations who want to just take the next step into the future, who believe that maybe just doing the same old things isn't the right thing anymore for this day and age, and they want to modernize their approaches. But not just tweak those approaches, they actually want to take a big step forward. Now, what I'm going to be talking about today, not everybody's doing this, but some are. Some are early adopters, some are people who are taking those steps forward. So hopefully I'll give you some ideas and thinking. I'm not saying you have to go away and do everything I'm going to talk about, but maybe some things to think about. What I'm going to do is start by looking at the whole concept of how the world of work is changing. I'm sure you're all too aware of it yourselves, but I just want to set the scene for what I want to say. And I also want to talk about how, as individuals, we are learning in new ways and show you how maybe organizations are not perhaps in touch or in alignment with those ways. And then talk about some of the features of what I call modern workplace learning that I'm helping organizations to think about, how that's different concept, mindset, culture, whatever word you want to use to take things forward. And then, of course, what that means in terms of a learning and development professional's work in the workplace, how that might change, the new things they might want to do. Antoine was going to mention the slides. There are some slides. These slides will be available as a PDF for you to download. And sorry, I'm getting messages. There's a PDF to receive. Also, at the end, I'll give you a link to where you can read everything I've said, will have said, and see the images much more clearly because they may not appear very easy on this screen here. So let's get started and start thinking about this whole concept of the evolving world of work, how things are changing, what is happening that means that work is changing. And as I said, I'm sure you are all too aware of the changes that are taking place in your own organizations. But one of the ones that I find most significant is the fact that information is exploding. And interesting facts that I found out that back in 1900, it was estimated that human knowledge doubled every 100 years. Do you know what they estimate human knowledge will be doubling in 2020? By every 12 hours. So this means we are being inundated with new facts, new information constantly. But yet, at the same time, the shelf life of knowledge is decreasing. This means that things are going out of date just as quickly as they are appearing. And once again, we're told things like some skills only have an 18-month window before they're out of date, particularly IT skills. And it's often said that a college degree will be out of date before the loan is paid off. The implications, I think, for that are huge for every individual about constantly learning and relearning new stuff. And for organizations too, the same. Added to that, we have the whole concept of automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, changing jobs. Not just replacing jobs, but probably changing most people's jobs, that constantly organizations and individuals will need to be continuously improving, learning, And this in itself brings huge demands on both individuals and organisations. What's more, people are living longer. I don't know if you've seen this book, The 100-Year Life, written by Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott, who are both professors at London Business School. And they're saying that, now that we're living longer, we're actually going to be working for 60 to 70 years. Good or bad. But the corporate implications of this are quite considerable. In a subsequent article, they showed that there's no longer going to be such a thing as a job for life. We don't just go into do some education, higher education, and then go into work and stay there for the whole of our careers and then retire after 30, 40 years. Things are going to look very different. We're going to see something that they call the multi-stage life, where people will be in and out of education, in and out of employment, sometimes self-employed throughout their careers until they come to retirement. It came from the MIT Sloan Review, those graphics there. They say something like, a 15-year-old today will probably have something like 17 jobs in 5 different industries. So they won't just stay in the same career path. They'll be moving around quite considerably. So for any individual, they're going to need to constantly learn, constantly relearn, constantly unlearn throughout their careers. And organizations are going to need to have people with the new skills to keep up with the changing jobs and people coming in and out of their workplace. So, we've known about a lot of this for quite a few years, but to what extent are individuals or organizations beginning to adapt to this new world? So, I think it's clear that, and you probably too, that modern individual, modern worker, if you like, modern employee, actually is learning in many new ways. And one of the conclusions I've come to this conclusion is through a survey I've been running over the last 13 years, where I've asked people to nominate their top tools for learning. So in 1997, have I got this right now? No. Forgot. I set up the first survey, and I asked people to nominate their top tools for learning. And it's been quite popular. I don't know how many of you have seen my top tools lists. A few, I hope. Good. I'm going to show you now this year's results. And in 2016, to mark the 10th year, I decided there were so many tools coming out, I needed to create the top 200 tools for learning. So this is this year's top 200 tools for learning. And you can see, interesting enough on the top, YouTube, Google, PowerPoint, Twitter, LinkedIn, so forth, and then all the rest of these tools. And you may recognize some of these logos here. But, it was an interesting exercise. But what it didn't show me was how people were using these tools. So for the last few years, I've said to people, can you please specify, are you using these tools for your own personal and professional use? Are you using them in the workplace? Or are you using them within higher education? And that meant I could then create some sub-lists that really showed the context in which people were using these tools. So this coming up now is the top 100 tools for personal and professional learning, the tools that every one of us individuals use for our own personal and professional purposes. And it's obviously a sub-list of the one you just saw, and 100 tools here, and you can see quite clearly that those that were dominating the list before, again, are dominant on the top 10 here. And then we have another 90 logos here of other types of tools. But once again, it doesn't really show you how they're using them. So in the survey, I asked people to explain how they're using these tools. what they're doing with them, why they're doing them, why they like them, and so forth. And that's been quite useful because that has allowed me to create a little graphic that shows how people are learning with these tools. And it shows me that they are learning for a number of different reasons. Not just to acquire new knowledge and skills, but to solve problems, to keep up to date, just for the joy of learning in many cases, for many different reasons. And they do that in 4 different ways, which I've called the 4 Ds of learning. And they're in these big boxes here. And let me just go through these. Now, the first box I called didactic, so things being taught. And clearly, if people want to acquire a new body of skills or knowledge, they tend to go to the sort of online course platforms like LinkedIn Learning and Coursera and things like that. They're very popular for sort of more formal approaches to acquire skills. But clearly, for other purposes, perhaps to solve performance problems or keep up to date with their industry and just general career development, they do much more for themselves by just finding things out through discovery. Now, clearly, they use these very popular web resources we've seen. And interestingly enough, podcasts have become really popular this year. They seem to have really taken off. And, you can see a huge number of tools in that sort of category here. But e-books and book abstracts are important. But they also use a number of tools to help with that purpose. Curation tools, the things that will go out and collect things for them, or to notify them about new resources. Subscribe to blogs through Feedly, for instance. So the whole category of tools they use for discovery. But the other key area here is they use a lot for what I call discourse, so talking, interacting, conversing, collaborating with others. And of course, in this context, that's why things like these social networks are so highly valued for them, because they can help them find out things, but they're much more about talking to people about what's happening in their industry, for instance, what they're doing, what they're thinking, and so forth, as well as collaborating with others, perhaps in more sort of organizational and community settings. So there's a whole category of tools there. But then we've got this whole other area of tools that people just use the tools to do their jobs, to just carry out their daily lives, and tools to help them with productivity, as well as sharing what they do and making sense of what they're doing as well. So 4 sort of main categories of areas of learning, if you like, many of which you probably wouldn't consider to be traditional forms of learning. So what we can summarize from that then is that they are learning in many different ways and for many different reasons. So not just to acquire a body of knowledge skills, but performance support and so forth. They're learning for many different reasons, and through discovery, didactics, etc. It's mostly highly organized and self-managed. So they're making those choices for themselves, what they choose to do, when they choose to do it, and how they choose to do it. And consequently, it's a very personal experience, not one that's been imposed on them that everybody else has. It becomes a much more individualized experience. And interestingly, of course, it's a very continuous process. They might take some courses from time to time, but they mainly spend very regular periods on the web, just finding things out for themselves, and particularly talking with others. So there were some of the key points that I ascertained from that top 100 tools for personal learning. So if we turn our attention now to the top 100 tools for workplace learning, to what extent are they supporting the learning that individuals are doing for themselves? So first of all, I'm going to show you the logos of the top 100 tools for workplace learning. And you will see, okay, we've got YouTube and so forth up there. Number one was actually PowerPoint. Would you believe it? I am using PowerPoint after all, so can't really complain. But then we've got, interestingly, collaboration tools up here, Slack and Zoom, and Teams and Zoom and so forth. And then of course, then we do have things like Articulate, and we have all the authoring tools. So using that four-block model, how do these tools map onto that? Well, I mean, just looking at that, you probably can see that they are quite different tools here than from the ones I showed earlier. And when we map them onto that 4 Ds of learning, most of them are very much focused, as we can see, on I'm called that directed learning because I wanted to broaden that in terms of not just training, but things that learning and development people do to people, create for people to learn from. So, of course, we have a huge number of course authoring tools. But we actually have, interestingly, a number of tools that are used for sort of creating assets and resources, so audios and videos and things, screencasts and so forth. And we have, the learning platforms, but interestingly, they vary from the sort of traditional sort of old LMSs through to these modern learning experience platforms. And some organizations now are sort of tapping into this concept of people learning from online courses for themselves, so they're building in sort of access to online courses. So, but most of the effort, most of the tools suggest that most of the learning effort goes into supporting directed learning approach. Whereas we think about the discovery element, we've got a few here, but so discovery doesn't seem to be something that's very much supported within the workplace. And in fact, where it is, it's mainly people are bought big curation platforms, which they've then linked into their learning management systems or whatever, or probably into their collaboration platforms. But it is clear that in the workplace, we've got much more interest in more supporting social learning in its widest sense of people talking to one another in the organization. And, interestingly enough, Microsoft Teams came out as a top collaboration platform this year, just above Slack. But we've got a whole range of tools, including Workplace, by Facebook appearing here as well. So there is more interest in and understanding about supporting the social learning that takes place as people do their jobs. But when we actually look at the tools to help people do their jobs, they are a little bit far and few between. So I think you can see a little bit of a mismatch between the way people are learning, which we seem to be more in this sort of area, than in the workplace, which is much more sort of in the traditional directed learning, although we do see some interest in creating more resources. But how do individuals, what do they find the most valuable ways of learning at work? We've seen those personal, professional learning, but what at work? So what could we find out about them to help us think about the way organizations should be supporting workplace learning? Well, another survey that I've run for the last 9 years, I think now, is one that asks people to rate the importance, in these terms, of these aspects of learning. Classroom training, e-learning, company resources, knowledge sharing, daily work experiences, so forth. I made it quite clear that, they're talking about the importance of learning in these ways for them, not for the organization, for them. So if you have a look at that question there, which would you rate as the most important way of learning for you in your organization? And which would you rate as the least important way of learning in your organization? I'm going to show you the results now. It's quite a lot on this slide. There's a lot of numbers and things. But again, what you're going to be looking for are what appears at the top and what appears at the bottom. Okay? We'll look at what appears at the bottom first. A classroom training. I have to tell you, 60% of the respondents were from learning and development departments, which says to me that 60% of people don't think that classroom training is valuable for themselves, yet they do this as part of their approach to workplace learning. E-learning comes in at 10th. And look what we've got at the top. So 93% thought it was either very important or essential. Just doing the day job, doing the learning from those daily work experiences. And through knowledge sharing with their team, web search. So in other words, for them, the value comes through doing and discourse and discovery rather than through didactics, which is what we saw in the earlier slide, is where people, learning and development departments seem to be putting the most effort. So I think that means, for me, and for many of the people I work with, shows that they need to be thinking a little bit differently about our way they think about workplace learning and the emphasis on the things they do. I'll answer your question in a minute if you don't mind. Let me just go through the next bit, then I'll open it up for some questions. So what does that mean? So I've worked with organisations, showing them this data, asking them for their feedback. And I'm now going to show you what we think are the sort of 5 features of what I call modern workplace learning. The things that perhaps you need to do differently from the way we've done things traditionally. Differently, doing different things and doing things differently. And as I said earlier, I think it's a lot about mindset and culture. And so the very first thing is the need to have a much broader understanding of that whole term learning. You know, when we talk about learning, most people think about training or courses or studying. But as we've just seen, for many people, learning happens in many different ways and for many different reasons. You know, when you often ask people to visualize learning, they think of a classroom or sitting in front of a computer doing an online course. But these are all ways of learning. So I think the first thing is we need to help organizations broaden their understanding of what learning means and how it happens. It's not something that you do just in a classroom. It may happen that way, but it's not the only way. But we need to think about learning in a different way. Now, this little chart here, I try to summarize some of the thinking that people have come up with. You know, we talk about formal and informal learning. That's one way we classify it. But we also need to think about intentional learning, things that we intentionally go out to do, to learn from, but also the learning that happens accidentally, you know, as a byproduct of doing something else. So it's not the first thing that we do, it happens as a result of doing something else. And we also need to be conscious of the fact that people can be aware that they're learning, but they can also be unaware of their learning. In other words, they can learn something, but they're not aware that they've done so until sometime later. They may suddenly realize at some stage that they actually knew something they didn't really had consciously processed. So when we map on those 4 Ds of learning, for instance, obviously, clearly, didactics, training, self-study falls quite clearly in the formal, intentional learning that most people are aware of, and that's what we've focused on. our concept of learning needs to broaden out to think, well, we can intentionally or purposefully find out the things in more informal ways and through discovery, but we can also be aware that we can learn things accidentally through just going on the web browsing, and even in some cases we may not be aware of that fact. And when it comes to discourse, that's interacting with people, we may intentionally interact with people to ask questions of individuals or groups to find out things, or we may just have conversations, once again, that either where we're aware of we've learned something or we're unaware of learning something. The classic water cooler example is perfect for that. You know, we're chatting around, having a drink, having a meeting, and we're not really aware that we're learning something. And when it comes to doing a J job, clearly we can do things like stretch assignments or look at resources to support our performance, which means we're intentionally learning something. But once again, a lot of the time we are learning accidentally as a result of just doing our day job. And as I said, once again, not always aware of it. So for organizations, this then means that, you know, it's more than just providing training. If we just provide training and perhaps a little bit of performance support, we're not really covering this whole broader area of what how learning happens in the workplace. We need to think about and enabling and supporting all these areas of work in new ways, because it's not about just going to be training people to do things anymore. It's going to be about helping them to learn intentionally, but also help them to become more aware of things that they're doing and learning from them. And the third feature is it's about enabling a continuous learning environment. We see that individuals learn continuously. We've seen up front how in the new world of work we're going to have to be continuously learning, unlearning and relearning. But that's not just going to come from continuously training people. It will be part of it, but it won't be the whole thing. It'll come much more from continuously helping individuals continuously acquire new knowledge and skills in all or any of these ways. And, you know, I'm sure you can already see that this is not the traditional work of learning and development teams. This isn't really where they get into it at all. So it's about broadening the scope of what learning and development means within the organization. So that's the third one. And the fourth one, it means learning is not something we just do in a separate place, in a separate activity, whether it be in a classroom or on your computer screen. It's actually an integral part of the daily work. It happens mostly in the flow of work as you do your job, searching perhaps for solutions to problems, talking to people, discussions with your colleagues in your teams and throughout the organization. And just by doing your job. So continuous learning is acquiring knowledge in any or all of these ways. We've done that one, and we've done its integrated part of learning in the flow of work. We said that one. And finally, most important work, of course, learning and development teams, you know, they can't do this all on their own. They can't possibly create and do everything to support everybody's continuous learning throughout their careers in their organizations and so forth. It means everybody now has to take responsibility for it in different ways. And at the center will be our individual, looks a bit odd, who needs to take much more responsibility for their continuous self-improvement, learning and development to stay relevant in their jobs, and not rely on everything being spoon-fed or given to them to do their jobs. And clearly, one important area is for managers to now take much more responsibility. As I said, learning and development can't do all this on their own. They need to take responsibility for the growth and development of their teams. They become an integral part of a new approach to workplace learning. So if they think, oh, this individual needs some training, I need to pass it off to L&D. That's the old way of doing it. Need to have those conversations, as we'll see, with their team to help them continuously improve and develop in non-training ways and value those non-training ways. Managers themselves will need to think differently. They'll need to think it's not about just sending somebody on a course, but how can I help this person improve in modern new ways, and will need to adopt those ways themselves, not just, as I said, pass it all off to learning and development. And of course, the learning and development team now has a much bigger role. It's about stopping trying to control the whole process. You know, I am the one. Learning and development belongs to learning and development teams, but building a continuous learning environment and culture that supports managers and individuals, working with them in different ways, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute. But before I open up to those questions, this means, I think, organizations recognize it means a new relationship with business. Learning and development is not just going to be doing things in traditional ways. It means a new relationship with managers, and it means a new relationship with individuals. With managers, therefore, it means moving away from this course order taker approach, where they pass off, oh, got a problem, put them on a course, to one which is much more about, working with managers at the grassroots level, supporting them, advising them, and helping them, inspiring them to become modern managers. Because they, as I said, managers will need to take on a new responsibility for themselves. And they are actually the key to a successful continuous learning environment. But their role changes too. They're not just somebody that directs people to do their job and make sure they do it. They need to take a much more active role in working with their team members, supporting them. Often it's said they need to be more of a coach than a boss. They need to have constant conversations with their team members, provide regular feedback. So it does require a different mindset, particularly for managers who have traditionally just done things, learning development, nothing to do with me, pass it all off. And in fact, with one of the big organisations in the UK, I've been focusing solely on helping managers think about their new roles and what it means for them. Now, as I'm going to be saying, you can't just do this by overnight, and you can't just tell managers that you've got to change. It's a process that takes time. And I always say, there are managers are already doing this. There's some wonderful managers out there looking after their teams. So work with them, support them. Don't bash your head against a brick wall with people who really don't want to change. Work with the ones who do, want to be inspired to do things differently. You can change things one conversation at a time, not through some great big change management program, but through conversations and helping people see the future. And when it comes to individuals, it's going to be about moving away from being what I call the learning gatekeeper, which is I control access to all learning in the organisation, as some do. And what's more, becoming what I call the learning police. I don't know if you can read that. Learning development is the only department authorised to provide you with learning. If you acquire any new information or skill from any source, i.e. from a colleague or online from Google, YouTube, or a social not working site, then you must have this checked and verified by learning development to ensure it is correct. They may then need to test you on it to ensure they are happy you understand it. And you'll also need to be tracked in the learning management system before you can use it in the workplace. Unauthorized learning will not be tolerated. You laugh, but Mick constantly I'm asked questions about why how can we let people learn things? They might learn the wrong things. We'll get to that one in a minute, but it means a different approach. It's not about controlling access, policing it all. It's about it's becoming what I call, just for the sake of it, a modern learning advisor, supporting, enabling learning in all its ways for, through, and at work. And that means new work for learning and development people, not just creating lots of stuff. There'll still be stuff to be created, but the more you do other stuff, less stuff you'll have to create. And as I said, you can't constantly create everything everybody needs. So I'm just going to briefly outline the things I'm going to talk about in the next part of the session, and then I'll answer any questions up to now. So that I think it means three things, or collaboratively with organizations, we've agreed it means three things. One is to enable independent continuous learning, or empower, whatever word you like to use, help people do much more for themselves. And secondly, support the learning that happens from the daily work, in the daily work, as a result of the daily work. And once you've done a lot of this, then addressing ad hoc performance problems, is going to happen less frequently. Whereas that's probably what most of the time you're doing, is addressing problems, probably through training of some sort or other. So, the second half, I'm going to talk about those three things. I could be here for all day. I often run, these sessions for like days. So I'm going to try and do it very, very quickly. But if you want to read up more, you can find out at the end. Does anyone have a question they want to ask me up to now? Somebody, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, I just want to make a statement. How many respondents you had? What was the size of the company and the sectors as well?
That was that first survey I showed you, was it? Okay. The one that's was it the top tool survey, or was it the learning in the workplace survey?
The one with how do you learn best?
Okay, so that's had about 7,000 to 8,000 people responded down over 8 or 9 years now. And I have a breakdown. Actually, when I give you the link at the end, go there and you can see the full demographics of it. Size of organisation, age of people, interesting enough, because all those things I thought were interesting, because you could perhaps say, big organisations do this. Younger people want this, but actually there's not an awful lot of difference across the different areas. There are some small differences, for sure, but not a huge differences. Not enough to really sort of categorise people. And I think this is the trouble. A lot of it's, this generational thinking, well, only young people want to do that and old people want to do the other things. Not always appropriate. We have younger people who like to do older things and vice versa. So, but the data's there if you want to have a look at it later on.
Because if we say that the managers is really there to coach and support and enable the employees for them to spend time in learning and so on. So I know I'm a bit of an advocate of the devil here, but I just would like to know, in your situations that you have gone through, who does the job and how do you find time for them to make it?
That's a good question. Thank you. Not devil's advocate, as somebody always asks it. Hopefully it'll come up in the next bits I'm going to show you. But it is about everybody thinking differently about their role. And time is always one that comes out. Well, I need to be working. I haven't got time to do all this. And I always say, if you think you haven't got time, then you don't value this kind of new approach appropriately. There's only the people who really value the whole concept of continuous learning. But I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So I hope that's sort of given you the broad sort of background to that. As I say, you can go online, you can look at all the data again, you can read much more than I've been able to say now, follow some links through to other people's thinking. So it's not just me standing here making it all up. It's a lot of background thinking. So I wanted to talk about these 3 areas here, and I think I've got about another half an hour. Have I? Good. If you get too tired, just say go home. But I'll just speak about some of these things. As I said, these are huge topics themselves, and I probably won't be able to answer all your questions in this short time available. I'd just like to give you a taste of the sort of things I've been doing with organisations to do this kind of thing. So let's start with this one, enable independent continuous learning. And this is about very much to do with individuals organising and managing their own continuous improvement, learning and development, in whatever way that suits them. You know, this isn't what I'm saying here. This is just part of the big picture. It's not just passing it all on to them, but it's getting them involved in doing much more for themselves. And so the manager's role is to much more to support that, provide time and support, and an environment in which that takes place. So learning development's role is much more about promoting, enabling and supporting that. Not going in and doing it for everybody, but supporting individuals and managers as they get started and then ongoing, as we'll see. So the promotion bit is very important because a lot of organisations recognise they need to have this in place, but they've got to get it started. How do they get things going? And so they tend to start off with some big promotional activity. And the things they might do is some sort of campaign, a learning campaign. You can read up some examples. Classic one that I worked with was Citibank, who did a big campaign which they called Be More. And every day they provided a little bit of activity for somebody to read about, just to promote this whole concept of people taking responsibility for themselves. But there's a couple of things they need to sort of build into that. One is, managers need to understand the economic imperative, which is what I said earlier. The changing world demands that we've got to think differently. We've got to be continuous learning, and organisations need to do so as well. Otherwise, they'll just stagnate. They need to have people coming in, bringing in new ideas and thinking, innovating and so forth. So it's something that organisations have got to do, and managers will need to grasp it as well. And for individuals, the what's in it for me? Why should I do this? Why should I spend time learning for the organisation? Well, of course, it's not just for the organisation, it's for themselves. As we've seen, their jobs won't necessarily have a job in a year, 5 years, 10 years. And that job will probably have changed. And if they haven't changed with it, their organisation will probably bring somebody else new in who can do the job. So it's in their best interest to continuously learn for themselves, to stay ahead of their career, and to also, direct their own career rather than their career happen to them. And when it comes to managers, one of the things we've been working on is helping managers think about when they're recruiting people, to recruit with something known as learning agility or learnability. So you don't just have a recruitment exercise that you tick off boxes, people are competent to do the job. You tick off whether people are able to continuously learn for themselves and can do things for themselves, can take on this responsibility. Google, for instance, that is what they do in their recruitment exercise, and they look for what are called learning animals. People who are continuously curious. Some of the big consultancies, have written about as well, how they're looking for learning agility. They're not looking for people who expect to have everything given to them, spoon-fed. They're looking for people to take responsibility for themselves. But of course, once you recruit for learning agility, you've got to keep it going. You can't just bring people in and say, now you're in, we're going to train you, and you can't do anything for yourself, and we're going to be the learning police. You've got to have the environment in which you can support and nurture that learning agility. And managers, of course, are very important because they're going to need to lead the way. They're going to walk the talk, as they say, do everything that they're asking their people to do. And there's lots being written about managers or leaders as constant learners for themselves, constantly acquiring new knowledge, new experiences for themselves, and demonstrating what they're doing to their team members. But if they're really serious about it, and this is the interesting piece, they might provide some time for it. So that's a good question. How much time, if you're going to give somebody to do something for themselves, how much time should you be giving them? So that's another survey I ran. I asked people how much time they spend on their own continuous learning. And I gave them these figures. None, 1 hour a week, or about 10 minutes a day, 2 to 3 hours, 4 to 5 hours, more than 10 hours. Just think about yourselves. How much time would you say you spend on something planned learning? Remember, it hasn't got to be formal courses. It could be anything. It could be informal discovery, discourse, but something more sort of planned, that's sort of intentional. How much would you spend? Well, here's the results of the survey after a couple of thousand people filled it in. And you can see sort of like the most popular time was like 2 to 3 hours, which works at about 20 to 30 minutes a day. Although quite a lot of people spend a lot more than that on it. Believe it or not, some people spend none, but there you go. So the next question was, how much time does your organization give you for continuous independent learning? I think from your laughs, you can see the pattern that it is true for most organizations, they don't. 2/3 don't, but more and more are. And where they are, again, that 2 to 3 hours, 20 to 30 minutes a day seems to be that magic figure. And I'm in constant contact with people from organisations who are given time to do this. And that they can spend, they maybe have 2 or 3 hours. It might be a block of time, or it might be sort of some regular time each day. But you're probably thinking 2 to 3 hours, 20 minutes a day, that's not very much. But actually, you can do quite a lot in 20 to 30 minutes a day, because it all adds up. 20 minutes a day, if you just spent 20 minutes on your coffee break or on your commute, adds up over time to about 80 hours, 10 training days. And it's something you're doing for yourself. So just a little bit, constantly, every day adds up. So one of the things we've been doing in part of this promotion is encouraging people to do some daily self-learning. Of course, the next thing they say is, well, what can I do in 20 to 30 minutes a day? But actually, you can do quite a bit. So, these are things that we've seen from my survey, the things they do in 20, 30 minutes a day, something informal. They could perhaps read a book abstract or listen to a podcast or interact with their professional learning network. Of course, they not want to spend the 20 minutes searching for something to do. So they're probably going to subscribe to some good resources that will bring them something every day or curate things. And this is the way I've been learning for at least the last 10 years or more, and I expect many of you have as well. A little bit every day, and not even conscious or aware of it some of the time. I subscribe to lots of blogs, so a new blog post comes out every day, and when I've got a few minutes spare, I'll read something. I'm not really a podcast or video person, so you haven't got to do everything. You do what suits you. I interact a lot on Twitter with my professional network, and I often say I couldn't be here standing talking to you if I hadn't been on Twitter, because that's where I've learned so much about what colleagues are doing around the world, what thought leaders are thinking about the future of work. For me, that has been a really key place for me to do my daily learning. But if you've got a bit more time, then you can do some more. Whoa, where's that gone? Ooh. Oh, what's happened to that slide? Ooh. Ooh. Help. Technical help. Oh, there we go. So it's me. It was the pinching, wasn't it? Okay, so there's the things around the outside. If you've got a bit more time, they tend to be the more traditional things, going in webinars and conferences and so forth. But they all are if you've got more time. So there's quite a lot you can do. But for really, that's that bit in the middle there that really, for me, has been brought me the value. Now, when we're just encouraging people to do that, we're saying what you should do is kind of have some aims or goals. Find some sources, but then very much share your achievements. So that's what I've done in my career. My goal, as I've just said, was to keep ahead of the game, to find out what's happening in the future of work, listening to what people are doing outside. The sources I've chosen are the ones who are the thought leaders, the people who can bring me the value. If people don't bring me value, then I don't read them. I don't read everything. I just read some of the good stuff. And then my achievements are actually writing books, sharing stuff with you people. And so my success is rated not in what I've done, but how I've achieved my goals and how I've shared it effectively with others. So when we encourage people to do this in an informal way, daily learning, it's about them to come up with their own aims and objectives, their own performance goals, identify their own sources, and to evidence their achievements, share their achievements. Now, the thing about time, there are some managers who are happy to give 20, 30 minutes a day or a couple of hours a week to do that. Sometimes, as I said, they actually give blocks. Sometimes they're happy to say, 20 minutes, you can just take 20 minutes to do something for yourself. But others want to see some comeback. They want to see some return for them for the time. So they want to do a formal process. So they want people to document it all, to write up their goals, to write up what they're going to do, and then to share their achievements in more formal ways. So we've got some who are much more happy just to see the results because the sharing of the good stuff is what is helping their teams move forward, helping their team manage, because they don't share everything they learn, they just share the good stuff. But others want to see a much more formal, official process that seems time's not wasted. So they're the more sort of older cultural organizations. But it is possible to do these things. And even in a culture where you want to do it more formally, then learning development can have another role, which is one that I've talked about with other organizations. And let me just do this first, to provide a learning concierge service. So normally we tell people you must do this training, and everybody has the same experience. With this one, we're telling people they can have their own personal experience. With a learning concierge service, it operates like a hotel concierge service. So if you're in a hotel and you want to go out and visit some place, you go up to concierge and you say, I've got half an hour or an hour and I'd like to visit a museum. And he or she will ask you what kind of things you'd like to do and have you got a car, and then direct you. So the learning concierge service is the same. I've got some goals, but how do I achieve them? And again, it's how much time have you got? What's your interests? How do you prefer to do that? More formally, or talking to people, or whatever, and then recommending solutions. So it's much more bespoke operation. Now, when I talk to organizations about this, they say, we couldn't do that. It's not sustainable. We couldn't do it for thousands of people. But of course, thousands of people don't want it. It'll just be, a lot of people can do this already, but for those people who want help, you can provide the help. And so it's interesting to see how it's in operation in organizations now. It could either be a personal service where you drop in to a learning advisor in a sort of area, or it could be an online thing. We have a Skype chat from time to time. But it's much more about supporting individuals' needs. I'll go back to this other one because when it came to the whole concept of promoting daily self-learning, I think, as you probably saw on that slide, that one of the really key ways of doing that is become a role model yourself. Show them how you're doing it, how you're investing your time, what you're doing, and what value it brings you, not just what you're doing. So that's why I shared that story with you about what I do. because for me it's brought considerable value. I couldn't have done what I've done over the 10 years on a daily basis through going on a course. Nobody runs courses and things that I would want to take, and I wouldn't want to go on them anyway. But anyway, it's suited me very well. So if you're going to support or promote a continuous independent model, then you need to demonstrate what value is going to bring for you yourself. So there was the concept of the learning concierge service. And I think the final thing is, well, of course, we can actually support continuous learning in ways. I mean, our learning development like providing stuff. There is stuff that they could provide, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So as we saw in those diagrams, that people do provide course platforms for people to link into and use, it's not the only resource. They need to be able to choose other things as well. It's not just about making sure that they use the platform that we have identified in our organisation. It's also about curating resources, finding things. A lot of teams I work with are going out and finding good stuff from the web and providing that for opportunities for continuous learning. If you want to perhaps improve your presentation skills, here's some good stuff to look at, some videos to watch, some people to connect with, some things to read or whatever. And then another way people are doing this is through what I call sort of drip feed, or you'd probably call it micro-learning, but micro-training, something every day, short bit every day, that they can tap into, take a tip or a technique or something like that. Not things that they have to do, but perhaps, if they haven't got time to go out and find something for themselves, could provide some impetus to start thinking about some daily learning. And then, interesting enough, another big area that some organisations working on is about putting together calendars of events, of things happening. So it's not just static resources, static courses. It's about events and activities that are happening both outside and inside that can just keep the ball rolling and helping people with different things, and particularly internal events of people sharing their achievements, sharing their experiences, sharing their knowledge with one another in perhaps more sort of coordinated ways. So when we think about independent continuous learning, it's not just about providing stuff for people. It's about helping them do much more for themselves, finding stuff for themselves, but in the concept of what are my aims, how will I know when I've achieved my new performance? Because in this new world, it's not about activity. It's not about what they do. It's about what they can. It's not about what they learn. It's about what they can do. New things they can do, the new performance they have. So we don't need to track and manage it all. We just want to see. Is that me? No. My phone's going at the same time. So some interesting things there. That's that category. Let me just briefly move on to the next one, because this support continuous learning from the daily work is probably the area where you think that's what the managers should be doing. What's got L&D got to do with that? Well, the classic way that L&D is getting into this area now is obviously by providing more performance support resources, creating stuff for people to learn just in time, on demand. Instead of going on a course just in case, they can find out how to do a task when they need it. So that's been a good start moving into that area, but really it's not the only way they can help. There are a number of other places that you can help your managers really start to begin to help individuals sort of extract the learning from the work. And that is one of the key ones is supporting reflective practices. Now, in many professions, reflective practice is a key thing. You have to sort of reflect on what you've been doing to achieve your sort of like accreditation. But I think it's something that is very useful for everybody to do. Because one of the things I showed you up front was people aren't always aware of what they've learned. So by reflecting on those experiences, they become more aware of some of the things they perhaps wouldn't have done otherwise. And I think John Dewey sums it up quite well. We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So when it comes to individuals, one of the ways that organisations doing is helping individuals keep track of what they've been doing at the end of the day, reflecting 10 minutes at the end of the day, either individually or probably more likely collectively, together, thinking it through. And that, of course, is part of supporting a more social learning and social collaboration in the workplace, because social learning is not putting people on a course and making them talk to one another and share stuff in a course. It's about helping them exchange ideas and knowledge at work, in the flow of work. And finally, then, the other area in this one is actually help managers to develop their own people. Again, if they see some need in an individual to perhaps to be developed, then not just phone up the L&D department, but do more things for themselves through on-the-job training where people can help one another, through stretch assignments, through informal coaching, all these ways, which we could talk about in more detail. And finally, then, that whole third area about addressing ad hoc performance problems. As I said, if you start to help managers take more responsibility for their own, the growth and development of their teams, then performance problems probably don't arise so much. But if they do, then learning development can have a different role, not just by, being phoned up and ordering a course, but by working more with the managers and their teams to understand those problems and collaboratively design solutions that are appropriate. The traditional role is a manager phones up, says, I need a course. Somebody goes off and creates that course, and then often it doesn't solve the problem at all, or it's not appropriate for the situation. This way, using a performance improvement consulting approach, learning development can work with a more collaborative approach, perhaps things like world cafes and things where individuals come together, identify what actually is the root of this problem, which may not be, the symptoms might not actually be the real problem underneath, and how can we best solve it? And in the organisations that use this approach, they have much better success rate in terms of the solutions, because the people themselves have defined the solution. It's not been imposed upon them. It's one that they have come up with themselves. And I've seen some really big examples of solutions which, originally sort of onboarding exercises which didn't work, but once the individuals got hold of it, they found solutions themselves in terms of collaborative working or collaborative learning that solved the problems in much better ways, much more effectively, and have won lots of awards for it as well. So those solutions might possibly require some training. They might not. It might actually be we need to change some processes or we need to remove some obstacles, but it might require some training, in which case it's about helping to find the most appropriate form of training that would best solve the problem. It might be something that you need to take somebody out and do in a classroom. It might be something that could be done through some new technology, but collaboratively working with the individuals to identify that sort of broadly what would work best for them in their particular situation is a new sort of role for learning and development. So I think I'm going to pause there because I see you looking quite tired. I've covered an awful lot. If you're interested in reading more, then all I've said today, plus a lot more, is available online in a resource that I called Modern Workplace Learning 2020. The first chapter you can just delve into and read, which is pretty much the first half of this session I did here. And then if you sign up, you can read the rest of it. To get there, you go modernworkplacelearning.com.